Good evening, everyone. In the last 2 videos of this series, we talked about and summarized the first 20 chapters of the classic novel Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. We explored key plot developments, character introductions, and early conflicts that set the tone for the story. Tonight, we'll continue our journey through this beloved novel, diving deeper into the characters' evolving relationships, hidden motives, and social dynamics. So, let's pick up where we left off and see what unfolds next in the world of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. As we move forward, you'll notice how the initial misunderstandings and subtle pride start to shift, revealing new dimensions of the characters. The narrative becomes richer with emotional tension, societal expectations, and moments of self-discovery. Whether you're reading for school or personal interest, this next section brings more depth and intrigue. So stay tuned as we uncover what happens next. In Chapter 21 of Pride and Prejudice the story resumes at the Bennet household shortly after the Netherfield ball, with the usual family dynamics and gossip shaping the atmosphere. The chapter opens on a relatively quiet note, but soon introduces developments that signal shifting relationships and intentions among the characters, particularly regarding Jane Bennet and Mr. Bingley. Jane receives a letter from Caroline Bingley, which quickly becomes the central event of this chapter. The letter, rather than bringing the expected warmth or friendly chatter, is a carefully crafted and somewhat manipulative message. Caroline informs Jane that the entire Bingley party has left Netherfield and returned to London, and she expresses doubt that they will return to the countryside that winter. Most notably, Caroline emphasizes her hope that her brother, Charles Bingley, will form a close attachment, possibly even a marriage with Georgiana Darcy, Mr. Darcy's sister. Jane, ever gentle and trusting, is upset but refuses to believe that Caroline could be acting with ulterior motives. She takes the letter at face value and assumes that the Bingley's departure is sincere, and that any romantic hopes she may have had regarding Mr. Bingley are likely to come to an end. Despite her obvious disappointment, she tries to remain composed and cheerful, displaying the strength and grace that are hallmarks of her character. Elizabeth, however, reads between the lines. From the moment Jane shares the letter with her, Elizabeth is skeptical of Caroline's intentions. She immediately suspects that Caroline is deliberately trying to separate Jane and Bingley, possibly with the aid or encouragement of Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth believes that Bingley is genuinely interested in Jane, and that he is being manipulated or influenced away from her. She is angry on her sister's behalf, not just at Caroline Bingley, but also at Mr. Darcy, whom she already dislikes. This further confirms Elizabeth's growing suspicion that Darcy is not only proud but actively unkind. This chapter is a turning point because it introduces more direct interference in Jane and Bingley's potential romance. Up to this point, their relationship seemed to be progressing smoothly, with mutual affection and interest. However, Caroline's letter marks the beginning of a more external conflict, where social maneuvering and pride start to intervene. Caroline's mention of Georgiana Darcy is especially telling. It is clear she desires a union between her brother and someone of wealth and status, not someone from a less fashionable and socially inferior family like the Bennets. The contrast between Jane and Elizabeth's responses to the letter also deepens the understanding of their characters. Jane chooses to believe the best of others, clinging to the idea that Caroline must be sincere, even when it causes her pain. She tries to suppress her feelings to avoid worrying her family. Elizabeth, on the other hand, is fiercely protective and refuses to allow such manipulation to go unchallenged in her mind. She is perceptive and cynical enough to see through Caroline's false friendliness and suspects darker motives at play. The broader themes of class, social ambition, and family reputation are also subtly present in this chapter. Caroline Bingley's actions reflect the rigid class consciousness of the time, as she considers Georgiana Darcy a more suitable match for her brother due to her wealth and aristocratic connections. Her condescension toward the Bennets, though polite on the surface, is evident in the way she implies that Jane is not good enough. This fuels the ongoing tension in the novel between personal happiness and societal expectations. The chapter concludes with Jane quietly nursing her disappointment and Elizabeth deep in thought about the forces working against her sister's happiness. There is no resolution, only a deepening of the emotional conflict. The reader is left to wonder whether Mr. Bingley truly lacks the strength to oppose his sister and friends, or if he will eventually realize Caroline's manipulation and return to Jane. This chapter may not include major external action or dramatic confrontation, but it plays a critical role in advancing the internal and emotional plot. It highlights the growing influence of social pressures and the character's personal integrity in dealing with them. It also lays the groundwork for the conflicts and misunderstandings that will shape the middle portion of the novel. In Chapter 22, Mr. Collins, undeterred by Elizabeth Bennet's recent rejection, swiftly turns his attention to her close friend, Charlotte Lucas. Within a remarkably short time, he proposes marriage to Charlotte, and she accepts. This sudden shift in Mr. Collins's affections highlights his mechanical and self-serving approach to marriage. He is less interested in emotional connection than in fulfilling what he sees as a social and moral obligation, primarily to please his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and to secure a respectable domestic arrangement. Charlotte's acceptance of Mr. Collins's proposal is equally calculated. At 27, she is fully aware of her limited prospects and sees marriage not as a romantic ideal, but as a practical necessity. Unlike Elizabeth, who values affection and mutual respect in a marriage, Charlotte prioritizes financial security and social stability. She understands Mr. Collins's flaws, but believes she can manage a comfortable life by maintaining her independence within the marriage, especially given his predictable and pompous character. Elizabeth is stunned when she learns of the engagement. Her reaction is a mix of disbelief and disappointment, not out of personal jealousy, but because Charlotte's decision challenges Elizabeth's ideals of love and compatibility. Elizabeth struggles to understand how someone she respects could willingly commit to a man she finds so absurd and insufferable. Despite Charlotte's clear and reasonable explanation that marriage is her best and perhaps only opportunity for a secure future, Elizabeth cannot reconcile this pragmatic view with her own belief that marriage should be based on personal happiness and mutual esteem. When the news spreads to the Bennet family, reactions are mixed. Mrs. Bennet is frustrated, having once hoped Mr. Collins would marry one of her daughters, ideally Elizabeth. Mr. Bennet, in contrast, finds the entire situation amusing, especially given his low opinion of Mr. Collins and his dry, ironic perspective on social conventions. The chapter presents a sharp contrast between romantic idealism and social realism. Elizabeth embodies the former, holding out for a marriage grounded in love, while Charlotte represents the latter, accepting the practical realities faced by women with limited means. Charlotte's choice is not portrayed as foolish or desperate, but as a strategic move within the constraints of her society. Austen uses this development to highlight the economic pressures shaping women's lives and the compromises many were forced to make. Mr. Collins's behavior also reveals much about his character. His quick shift from Elizabeth to Charlotte reinforces his lack of genuine feeling and his primary concern with appearance and duty. He wants a wife who will reflect well on him and help him fulfill the expectations of his social position, not someone he truly connects with or respects. Through Charlotte's engagement, Austen deepens her critique of a society that often left women few options besides marriage for financial and social security. The chapter serves as a quiet but powerful commentary on the difficult choices women faced and sets up further exploration of marriage as both a social contract and a personal union throughout the rest of the novel. In Chapter 23, the news of Charlotte Lucas's engagement to Mr. Collins spreads quickly and creates a wave of mixed emotions, particularly within the Bennet household. The chapter focuses on the reactions of Elizabeth and her family as they come to terms with the surprising development. Elizabeth remains deeply disturbed by Charlotte's decision. Although she respects her friend, she cannot help but feel a sense of loss and confusion. The idea that someone as intelligent and sensible as Charlotte could consent to marry a man as pompous and ridiculous as Mr. Collins is difficult for Elizabeth to accept. She sees the marriage as a betrayal of personal values, a surrender to social pressure and practicality over emotional fulfillment. While Elizabeth tries to maintain a sense of loyalty to her friend, the engagement begins to alter her perception of Charlotte, revealing the growing gap between their ideals. Mrs. Bennet is furious and disappointed. She had previously hoped Mr. Collins would marry one of her daughters, and she cannot forgive Charlotte for stealing what she saw as an opportunity for Elizabeth. Her frustration is heightened by her inability to grasp why Elizabeth would reject such a respectable offer in the first place. This reinforces Mrs. Bennet's obsession with marrying off her daughters and her lack of understanding of Elizabeth's deeper values. Mr. Bennet, on the other hand, reacts with his usual irony and detachment. He finds the whole situation amusing and takes the opportunity to mock both Mr. Collins and the absurdity of how quickly his attentions shifted from Elizabeth to Charlotte. Though he sympathizes with Elizabeth's point of view, he remains emotionally distant and provides little support or guidance. Meanwhile, the rest of the Bennet sisters react with varying levels of surprise or indifference, though none are particularly affected beyond Elizabeth. Jane is calm and composed as usual, though concerned for her sister's feelings. As Charlotte visits the Bennets to share her news in person, the conversation between her and Elizabeth is tense and emotionally charged. Charlotte tries to explain her reasoning in a calm, matter-of-fact way. She stresses the security and social position the marriage offers her, and how she plans to live a comfortable, managed life with Mr. Collins. Elizabeth listens but remains unconvinced. Although she does not openly criticize Charlotte's choice, she is clearly disheartened and feels a growing emotional distance between them. This chapter further explores the theme of marriage as a social contract versus a personal bond. Charlotte's choice is again presented as a rational decision within the constraints of the era, while Elizabeth's internal conflict emphasizes her resistance to the notion that marriage should be based solely on status or financial necessity. Austen carefully avoids painting Charlotte as foolish. Instead, she highlights the complex social pressures that force women to make difficult choices. The chapter also underscores Elizabeth's increasing sense of isolation in her beliefs. Surrounded by a society that views marriage in practical terms, she stands apart, holding out for a relationship based on mutual respect and affection. This sets her on a different path from her peers and even her closest friends, reinforcing her role as the novel's moral center and one of Austen's most progressive characters. By the end of the chapter, the emotional distance between Elizabeth and Charlotte has grown. Though their friendship remains intact on the surface, the deep philosophical divide between them begins to show. The engagement changes not just Charlotte's future, but also the dynamics within the story, introducing a quiet but significant shift in Elizabeth's world. In Chapter 24, the narrative shifts back to Jane Bennet's emotional situation as she continues to struggle with Mr. Bingley's unexpected absence and Caroline Bingley's disheartening letter. The chapter opens with Jane and Elizabeth reflecting on the growing distance between Jane and Bingley, now that he has left Netherfield and shown no signs of returning. Jane remains composed but clearly sorrowful, trying to convince herself and others that Bingley's feelings were never deeply engaged, and that his departure is not necessarily influenced by external manipulation. Her gentle and forgiving nature leads her to believe the best of others, even in disappointment. Elizabeth, however, holds a very different view. She is increasingly convinced that Bingley's separation from Jane has been orchestrated by his sisters and Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth is particularly angry at Mr. Darcy, whom she suspects of using his pride and influence to dissuade Bingley from pursuing a relationship with someone he considers socially inferior. She is also frustrated with Bingley for being so easily led and lacking the strength to follow his own heart. Though Elizabeth does not express all of her suspicions to Jane, she remains deeply troubled by the injustice of the situation, and determined in her belief that Jane's feelings were sincere and deserved better treatment. The Bennet sisters' reflections are interrupted when Mr. Gardiner and Mrs. Gardiner, their aunt and uncle from London, arrive in Hertfordshire to visit the family. Their presence brings a fresh and sensible energy into the Bennet household. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner are intelligent, polite, and well-mannered, and they serve as a contrast to some of the more eccentric members of the Bennet family. They also serve as additional role models and confidants, particularly for Elizabeth, who has a close and respectful relationship with her aunt. During a private conversation, Mrs. Gardiner quickly notices Jane's low spirits and asks Elizabeth about her sister's state of mind. Elizabeth confides in her aunt, explaining the situation with Bingley and sharing her concerns about the role his sisters and Mr. Darcy may have played in separating the couple. Mrs. Gardiner, though sympathetic, is more cautious in her assessment. She acknowledges the possibility of interference, but also suggests that Jane's calm demeanor may have misled Bingley into underestimating the strength of her affection. Mrs. Gardiner's insight adds a thoughtful and balanced perspective to the conversation, suggesting that misunderstandings and a lack of open communication may have also contributed to the situation. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gardiner becomes aware of the growing attachment between Elizabeth and George Wickham, who continues to charm everyone with his friendly and engaging manner. Mrs. Gardiner expresses mild concern about the possibility of a match between them, particularly due to Wickham's lack of fortune. She warns Elizabeth gently that affection alone may not be enough to secure a happy future, especially when financial stability is uncertain. Elizabeth listens respectfully but remains unconcerned for the moment, viewing Wickham as a pleasant companion rather than a serious romantic prospect, though her interest in him is evident. Chapter 24 deepens several of the novel's ongoing themes, including love versus social expectation, personal integrity, and the influence of wealth and class in romantic relationships. Jane's quiet heartbreak contrasts with Elizabeth's more passionate and outspoken defense of her sister's worth. Their differing emotional responses reflect their personalities but also underscore the challenges of navigating romantic disappointment in a society governed by rigid class structures. The arrival of the Gardiners provides not just a new setting for discussion, but also introduces characters whose wisdom and emotional balance contrast with the chaos and self-interest that dominate much of the Bennet household and social circle. Their influence, particularly Mrs. Gardiner's thoughtful advice, will continue to shape Elizabeth's perspective and decisions as the story progresses. The chapter closes with Elizabeth feeling more certain of the injustices her sister has faced, while also being gently reminded by her aunt of the realities of life and marriage. The events of this chapter quietly lay the groundwork for future developments, particularly as the connections between Elizabeth, Wickham, and Darcy continue to evolve. In Chapter 25, the focus remains on the Bennet family and the Gardiners' visit to Longbourn. The chapter begins with a significant change in Mr. Collins's situation. He leaves Longbourn to return to Hunsford, having finalized his engagement to Charlotte Lucas. His departure brings some relief to Elizabeth, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable in his presence, especially after the awkwardness surrounding his rejected proposal and sudden engagement to her close friend. Shortly after Mr. Collins leaves, Sir William Lucas, Charlotte's father, arrives at Longbourn to announce that Charlotte has invited Elizabeth to visit her at Hunsford. He hopes that Elizabeth will accept the invitation and help ease the transition for Charlotte as she prepares for married life with Mr. Collins. Although Elizabeth is still struggling to fully accept Charlotte's decision, she agrees to the visit out of loyalty to her friend and a desire to see for herself how Charlotte will manage her new role as Mr. Collins's wife. Meanwhile, the Gardiners continue their stay and provide a stabilizing influence in the household. Their good sense, tact, and kindness stand in contrast to the silliness and impropriety of other members of the Bennet family, particularly Mrs. Bennet, who remains preoccupied with marrying off her daughters. The Gardiners' visit also brings emotional comfort to Jane, who is still quietly nursing her disappointment over Mr. Bingley's absence. During this time, Mrs. Gardiner takes a more active interest in Elizabeth's personal affairs. She observes the growing familiarity between Elizabeth and George Wickham and becomes increasingly concerned. Wickham continues to make himself agreeable and attentive, and Elizabeth enjoys his company. However, Mrs. Gardiner sees that Wickham, though charming, lacks the financial stability that would make him a suitable match for her niece. She gently warns Elizabeth against forming an attachment that could lead to long-term unhappiness or financial strain. Elizabeth appreciates her aunt's concern, but insists that her interest in Wickham is casual and harmless. This conversation underscores one of the novel's central themes, the tension between romantic feelings and economic realities. Elizabeth values personal happiness and emotional connection, but her aunt reminds her that love without financial security can lead to hardship. Austen presents both viewpoints with understanding Elizabeth's desire for genuine affection and Mrs. Gardiner's practical wisdom reflect the difficult choices women faced in a society where marriage was often their only path to stability. The chapter also offers further contrast between Elizabeth and her friend Charlotte. While Elizabeth remains determined not to marry without love, Charlotte has accepted a life of convenience and compromise. This difference in philosophy becomes more poignant as Elizabeth prepares for her visit to Hunsford, where she will see Charlotte living the life she herself rejected. Overall, Chapter 25 continues to develop the relationships and themes established earlier in the novel. The Gardiners emerge as thoughtful and reliable figures in Elizabeth's life, offering both emotional support and grounded advice. Mr. Collins's departure and Charlotte's invitation mark a transition in the plot, setting the stage for Elizabeth's journey to Hunsford and her deeper encounters with Mr. Darcy and Lady Catherine de Bourgh in the chapters to come. In Chapter 26, Elizabeth begins to act on the invitation from Charlotte Lucas and prepares for her upcoming visit to Hunsford. Before her departure, however, the chapter continues to explore two important threads: Charlotte's new life as an engaged woman and Elizabeth's relationship with George Wickham. Elizabeth writes to Charlotte, accepting her invitation, and Charlotte responds warmly, expressing eagerness for her friend's visit. Although Elizabeth is still uncomfortable with Charlotte's marriage to Mr. Collins, she remains loyal and curious. She wants to see how Charlotte is adjusting to her new situation, and how she is managing her life with such an absurd man. Elizabeth knows that Charlotte is pragmatic and sensible, but she still finds it difficult to imagine a friend she respects making such a personal compromise. Meanwhile, George Wickham continues to spend time with Elizabeth, and their conversations remain enjoyable and easy. Elizabeth appreciates his charm, manners, and attentiveness. However, Wickham's attention begins to wane somewhat when a young woman named Miss King unexpectedly inherits a large fortune. Soon after, Wickham begins to shift his interest toward Miss King, making his motivations more transparent. Elizabeth notices this change and is somewhat disappointed, though not deeply heartbroken. Her pride is stung more than her heart, and she quickly recovers, telling herself that she was never truly in love with him. Elizabeth discusses this change in Wickham's behavior with her aunt, Mrs. Gardiner, who had earlier expressed concern about his lack of fortune. Mrs. Gardiner gently criticizes Wickham's sudden interest in Miss King and warns Elizabeth to be cautious with her judgments. Although she is not surprised that Wickham would pursue someone with money, She reminds Elizabeth that such practical concerns often drive people's choices, especially when one has few other options. Elizabeth acknowledges the truth in her aunt's words, but maintains a critical view of Wickham's apparent opportunism. The situation with Wickham serves as an important moment of growth for Elizabeth. While she is not devastated by his shift in affection, she begins to reflect more seriously on character and integrity, not just charm and appearance. This moment hints at the beginning of her emotional maturation and her ability to question first impressions, even if she does not yet apply this same scrutiny to her opinion of Mr. Darcy. The chapter concludes with Elizabeth preparing for her trip to Hunsford, where she will be joined by Sir William Lucas and Maria Lucas, Charlotte's younger sister. The anticipation of this visit marks a new stage in the novel, as Elizabeth is about to step outside the familiar world of Longbourn and into the very different environment of Hunsford and Rosings Park, where she will encounter new perspectives, renewed conflict, and transformative experiences. Chapter 26 continues to highlight the novel's themes of marriage, social mobility, and personal growth. It demonstrates how quickly fortunes and affections can change, how appearances can be misleading, and how societal pressures influence choices in love and life. Elizabeth's journey, both literal and emotional, is gaining momentum, setting the stage for significant revelations and challenges ahead. In Chapter 27, Elizabeth Bennet sets off from Longbourn to visit her friend Charlotte Lucas at Hunsford, accompanied by her aunt and uncle, the Gardeners. The journey marks a significant change in Elizabeth's social environment and offers her a chance to observe Charlotte's married life firsthand. Upon arriving at the parsonage, Elizabeth notices the difference between Charlotte's modest, practical home and the lively, bustling atmosphere of Longbourn. Charlotte has settled into her role as Mrs. Collins with a calm acceptance, managing the household with efficiency and adapting to her husband's peculiarities. Though Elizabeth still finds Mr. Collins insufferable, his obsequiousness toward Lady Catherine de Bourgh and his pompous demeanor remain unchanged. She recognizes Charlotte's quiet strength and pragmatism in handling the marriage. Mr. Collins continues to display his excessive admiration for Lady Catherine, frequently praising her status and opinions. His conversations are filled with long, winded speeches and attempts to impress Elizabeth, who listens with polite but restrained amusement. Despite his tiresome nature, Elizabeth remains polite and respectful, showing her characteristic wit and intelligence beneath her composed exterior. During her visit, Elizabeth learns more about Lady Catherine de Bourgh and her commanding presence. Mr. Collins speaks of Lady Catherine with reverence, describing her as a woman of great importance and influence. Elizabeth senses that Lady Catherine's domineering personality and strict views will play a significant role in the unfolding story. Elizabeth also encounters Maria Lucas, Charlotte's younger sister, who is lively and eager, providing a contrast to the quiet and orderly life at the parsonage. Through Maria's cheerful demeanor, Elizabeth is reminded of the spirited and social world she left behind. Throughout the chapter, Elizabeth reflects on the nature of marriage, comparing Charlotte's practical approach with her own ideals. She admires Charlotte's ability to find contentment in compromise, but remains skeptical of a life so clearly shaped by convenience and social expectation, rather than affection and mutual respect. The chapter ends with Elizabeth settling into her new surroundings, preparing for the social visits and interactions that will soon bring her into closer contact with Lady Catherine and other members of the local gentry. Elizabeth's sharp observations and independent spirit promise that her stay at Hunsford will be both challenging and revealing. Chapter 27 deepens the novel's exploration of social class, marriage, and individual character, while setting the stage for Elizabeth's evolving relationship with Mr. Darcy and the influential figures connected to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. In Chapter 28, Elizabeth continues to settle into life at the Collinses' parsonage at Hunsford. She begins to attend more social gatherings and outings organized by Mr. Collins and Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which expose her to the local upper-class society and its rigid social expectations. Elizabeth's sharp observations reveal the stark contrast between the genteel world of Rosings Park and the simpler, more familiar atmosphere of Longbourn. She notices the elaborate manners, formal conversations, and deference paid to Lady Catherine, whose imposing presence dominates the social scene. Lady Catherine's pride and insistence on social hierarchy become increasingly apparent, as do the ways in which Mr. Collins attempts to curry favor with her through exaggerated flattery and servility. Despite the stiffness and artificiality of the social environment, Elizabeth maintains her independent spirit and critical eye. She quietly resists the attempts by Lady Catherine and others to impose their values and judgments upon her. Her interactions highlight her wit, intelligence, and unwillingness to conform blindly to social conventions. Elizabeth also learns more about Lady Catherine's character through conversations and observations. She is portrayed as imperious and overbearing, with a strong sense of entitlement and a desire to control those around her, including her daughter Anne, whose future Lady Catherine is keen to arrange. This introduces themes of power, control, and social obligation that will influence Elizabeth's experiences during her stay. At the same time, Elizabeth continues to engage in pleasant and candid conversations with Charlotte, who explains her pragmatic approach to marriage and life at Hunsford. Charlotte's contentment with her choices contrasts with Elizabeth's more idealistic views, deepening the novel's exploration of different attitudes toward marriage and social roles for women. Mr. Collins's behavior remains a source of comic relief. His awkwardness, pomposity, and obsequiousness provide a humorous counterpoint to the more serious social dynamics unfolding around Elizabeth. His attempts to impress Lady Catherine and secure his position through social means are both pitiable and entertaining. Chapter 28 sets the tone for Elizabeth's experiences in this new social milieu, highlighting the challenges she faces in balancing her personal values with the pressures of class and expectation. It prepares readers for the forthcoming interactions with Lady Catherine and the development of Elizabeth's complicated relationship with Mr. Darcy, whose presence looms increasingly over the story. Through Elizabeth's eyes, the chapter critiques the rigid class distinctions and social rituals of Regency England, emphasizing the novel's ongoing themes of individuality, pride, and prejudice within the constraints of society. In Chapter 29, Elizabeth attends her first visit to Rosings Park, the grand estate of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. The occasion offers Elizabeth a first-hand look at the lavish lifestyle and social dominance exercised by Lady Catherine, whose commanding presence immediately impresses and somewhat intimidates Elizabeth. Lady Catherine receives Elizabeth with a mixture of condescension and curiosity. She is quick to assert her social superiority, questioning Elizabeth about her family and background in a manner that is both intrusive and patronizing. Despite Lady Catherine's overbearing demeanor, Elizabeth remains composed and responds with polite but clear confidence, refusing to be cowed by the lady's haughty attitude. During the visit, Elizabeth observes the rigid hierarchy that governs interactions at Rosings. Lady Catherine's household operates under strict rules, and her influence is felt in every aspect of life there. Elizabeth notices the deference shown not only to Lady Catherine, but also to her daughter Anne de Bourgh, who is sickly and quiet, largely overshadowed by her mother's forceful personality. The conversations during the visit reveal Lady Catherine's tendency to dominate discussions, often dismissing or belittling those she considers beneath her. Elizabeth's quick wit and refusal to accept Lady Catherine's assumptions create subtle tensions. While Elizabeth maintains civility, she does not shy away from expressing her own opinions, even when they conflict with Lady Catherine's expectations. The chapter also highlights Mr. Collins's eager attempts to please Lady Catherine. His sycophantic behavior and exaggerated praise of his patroness embarrass Elizabeth and others. underscoring his lack of self-awareness and dependence on social rank for validation. Elizabeth's visit to Rosings deepens her understanding of the social world she is navigating and introduces her to the complex power dynamics at play. It also sets the stage for future confrontations and developments involving Lady Catherine, who is protective of her family's status and quick to challenge anyone she views as a threat. Overall, Chapter 29 contrasts Elizabeth's independent spirit with the oppressive social hierarchy embodied by Lady Catherine de Bourgh. It emphasizes themes of pride, class distinction, and personal integrity, while advancing the plot by bringing Elizabeth into closer contact with the influential figures who will shape her journey. In Chapter 30, Elizabeth continues to navigate the social environment of Rosings Park and the company of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. During a dinner party at the estate, Elizabeth observes the formal interactions among the guests and the subtle displays of power and influence exercised by Lady Catherine. The evening highlights the contrast between Elizabeth's spirited independence and the rigid, hierarchical world of the upper class. Mr. Collins, ever eager to impress his patroness, is particularly obsequious during the gathering, offering excessive compliments and drawing attention to Lady Catherine's status. His behavior further emphasizes his dependence on social rank and lack of personal confidence. Elizabeth engages in conversations with various guests, demonstrating her intelligence and wit. Despite the stiff social atmosphere, she maintains her composure and subtly challenges the assumptions and expectations imposed by Lady Catherine and others. Throughout the evening, Elizabeth notices the delicate and somewhat tragic presence of Anne de Bourgh, Lady Catherine's sickly daughter, whose meekness contrasts sharply with her mother's domineering personality. The interactions hint at the pressures and limitations faced by women in aristocratic families, particularly those like Anne, whose futures are largely determined by family arrangements. The chapter deepens Elizabeth's awareness of the social constraints and personal sacrifices involved in maintaining status and power. It also foreshadows the tensions and conflicts that will arise as Elizabeth's independent nature clashes with Lady Catherine's authoritarian control. Overall, Chapter 30 continues to explore themes of class, power, and individual agency, setting the stage for further developments in Elizabeth's relationship with both Mr. Collins and the broader world of Rosings Park.